Benito Mussolini called himself Il Duce, the leader who would make Italy powerful again. But behind the proud speeches hid a dark nightmare of violence and control. One man's hunger for dominance destroyed families, cities, and his own future. And the way his story ended after World War II is almost too hard to believe. When Mussolini came to power in 1922, Italy was a nation filled with anger, poverty, and disappointment. The country had fought hard in World War I, but the victory brought little reward. Thousands of soldiers had died. The economy was broken, and unemployment was everywhere. People felt betrayed by their government and wanted someone strong to lead them. Mussolini used that moment perfectly. He was a former journalist who knew how to use words to win people over. He promised jobs, order, and national pride. Many Italians were tired of weak governments that argued endlessly. So when Mussolini marched on Rome with his followers, the famous Black Shirts, in October 1922, the king didn't resist. Instead, King Victor Emmanuel III invited Mussolini to form a new government, hoping it would bring stability. Mussolini wanted Italians to see him as the savior of their nation. He filled newspapers, schools, and radio broadcasts with his image and speeches. Children learned songs about him. Posters showed him as strong, fearless, and wise. But it was all just a mask. Those who spoke against him were arrested, beaten, or even killed. Opposition parties were banned, and the police spied on everyone. He promised to bring back the greatness of ancient Rome. He built grand buildings, organized massive parades, and sent troops to conquer Ethiopia in 1935. He wanted to prove that Italy could build an empire again. But these victories came at a huge cost. Thousands of Ethiopians were killed, and Italy's resources were drained. Still, Mussolini used propaganda to make people believe he was unstoppable. As years passed, his hunger for glory grew. He believed that by joining powerful nations like Germany, Italy could dominate Europe. But Italy's economy was already weak. Factories lacked raw materials, and the army was poorly trained. Many soldiers didn't even have proper boots or weapons. Yet Mussolini ignored the warnings and dreamed of power alongside Adolf Hitler. When World War II began in 1939, Mussolini watched from the sidelines at first. He waited to see who would win. Then when Germany started conquering Europe, he jumped in, hoping to share the victory. But reality hit hard. The Italian army was not ready. The tanks were outdated, the soldiers poorly equipped, and the country had little fuel or steel to support a long war. In Greece, his forces failed miserably. The invasion that started in October 1940 turned into a disaster. The Greek army pushed Italian troops back into Albania. Mussolini was humiliated and had to beg Hitler for help. German forces eventually invaded Greece in April 1941 and saved Italy from total collapse. But it made Mussolini look weak, not strong. In North Africa, the story was the same. Mussolini sent his troops to fight British forces in Egypt and Libya, hoping to take control of the Suez Canal. But the Italian army couldn't handle it. Once again, German help was needed. The famous German general Erwin Rommel arrived with the Africa Corps and turned the tide for a while. But Italy's reputation was already ruined. At home, things were getting worse. Allied bombings destroyed cities like Milan, Turin, and Naples. Food became scarce, and people waited in long lines for bread and oil. Factories were closing. Mothers couldn't feed their children. Soldiers were dying in foreign lands for a war that no longer made sense. By 1943, Italy was falling apart. The Allies had invaded Sicily in July, and the Germans were slowly retreating. People started blaming Mussolini for everything. The same men who once cheered him began whispering behind his back. On July 24th, 1943, The fascist Grand Council met in Rome. These were Mussolini's most trusted officials, the ones who had supported him for over 20 years. But that night, they voted to remove him from power. It was a shocking betrayal. The next day, July 25th, King Victor Emmanuel III called Mussolini to his palace. The dictator expected to discuss military plans. Instead, the king told him he was dismissed and ordered his arrest. As Mussolini left the building, police officers quietly took him away. The man who had once controlled millions, who had made Italy fear and worship him, was now just a prisoner. But the Italian government now faced a dangerous situation. Germany still occupied much of Italy, and Hitler was furious that his old ally had been overthrown. The Italian authorities knew that if Germans found out where Mussolini was being kept, they would try to free him immediately, so they decided to move him again and again, keeping his location secret even from many Italian officials. At first, Mussolini was held on the island of Ponza, off the coast of Naples. It was a quiet and isolated place, surrounded by the sea, making escape almost impossible. But when news spread that the Germans were searching for him, the Italian military decided it was too risky to leave him there. He was then moved to another island, La Maddalena, near Sardinia, under heavy guard. Yet even that wasn't safe enough. German planes were flying overhead, trying to spot where he might be hidden. Finally, the Italian government chose one of the most secure places they could think of, a mountain hotel called the Hotel Campo Imperatore, located high in the Gran Sasso Mountains in central Italy. It was surrounded by cliffs and could only be reached by cable car. Mussolini was taken there in early September 1943, cut off from the outside world. He spent his days reading newspapers, writing in his diary, and wondering what would happen to him. But while Mussolini was isolated, Hitler was making plans. He refused to accept that his friend and partner in the war was gone. Hitler believed that Mussolini's capture was a betrayal and that he must be rescued at any cost. So he ordered a daring special operation to free him. On September 12, 1943, German paratroopers and commandos launched Operation Eiche, or Operation Oak. The mission was led by Otto Scornzi, a tall and confident SS officer known for taking huge risks. Using gliders, his team landed directly near the hotel, shocking the Italian guards. The Germans moved quickly and captured the guards without firing a single bullet. Moments later, Mussolini walked out of the hotel, stunned, but alive. A small German plane, a Fieseler Storch, landed on the rough mountain slope to take him away. Despite the dangerous conditions, the pilot managed to lift off successfully, carrying Mussolini down the mountain. Within hours, he was flown to Vienna and then to Munich, where Hitler was waiting for him. But when Hitler saw Mussolini again, he realized his old friend was not the same man. Mussolini looked pale, weak, and exhausted. The months of imprisonment had broken him. He no longer spoke with confidence or fire. Still, Hitler refused to let him fade into history. He told Mussolini he must lead a new fascist government in northern Italy under German protection. Mussolini didn't have the strength or power to refuse. And so, in late 1943, Mussolini announced the creation of the Italian Social Republic, also known as the Republic of Salo, named after the small town on Lake Garda where his government was based. On paper, Mussolini was once again the leader of Italy, but in reality he was little more than a puppet controlled by the Germans. The German army now occupied northern and central Italy, while the Allies held the south. The country was split in two, and so were its people. Families were divided between loyalty to the king, support for the partisans, or fear of the fascists still loyal to Mussolini. It was a nation living in chaos. Mussolini's new government tried to act powerful, but it had no real control. Every major decision was made by German officers, or directly ordered from Berlin. Hitler's soldiers were everywhere, enforcing their rule with violence. Anyone who opposed them, was arrested or executed. To prove he was still in charge, Mussolini began holding public trials of those who had voted to remove him from power in 1943. One of them was his own son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano. Mussolini allowed the Germans to carry out his execution in January 1944, a move that shocked many Italians and even his own family. Meanwhile, the Italian resistance movement, known as the Partisans, was growing stronger every day. These were groups of ordinary Italians, including farmers, workers, and students, who fought secretly against the fascists and the Germans. They carried out ambushes, sabotage missions, and attacks on transport lines. Their courage gave hope to millions who wanted the war to end. Inside the Republic of Salo, fear ruled. People were arrested for even small acts of disobedience. Spies were everywhere. The police and German SS units tortured prisoners, executed partisans, and burned villages suspected of helping them. As the months passed, Mussolini became more isolated. His health was deteriorating fast. He suffered from constant stomach pain and headaches, and doctors said he was deeply depressed. He rarely smiled and often stayed silent for hours. His wife, Rachel, lived separately most of the time, while his mistress, Clara Petacci, stayed close to him, offering comfort and refusing to abandon him, even when the situation became hopeless. By 1945, the Republic of Salo was collapsing. The German army was losing ground on every front, and Allied forces were pushing north through Italy. Cities like Florence and Bologna were being liberated. Even Mussolini's most loyal followers began fleeing the country or surrendering to save themselves. He knew the end was coming. And on April 25, 1945, he made his final decision to flee. He knew that, if captured, there would be no mercy. Disguised as a German soldier, Mussolini put on a steel helmet and a heavy military coat with German badges. He thought the disguise might help him blend in among retreating German troops. Alongside him was Clara Petacci, who refused to leave his side no matter what. She begged him not to abandon her, and Mussolini agreed to let her come. They joined a German convoy from the 52nd SS Battalion, which was retreating north toward the Swiss border. There were also a few remaining fascist officials and bodyguards traveling with them. Their goal was to cross into Switzerland, a neutral country, and from there Mussolini hoped to Spain. Spain, under Franco's dictatorship, was sympathetic to fascism, and Mussolini believed he might be safe there. He imagined living quietly, perhaps even writing his memoirs, explaining his version of history, but those were only dreams. As the convoy moved through the mountain roads of Lombardy, the tension grew. The partisans had set up dozens of checkpoints in the region. They stopped vehicles, checked documents, and searched for escaping fascists. The convoy had to move carefully. Every village was risky. Every turn could lead to capture. On the morning of April 27, 1945, the convoy reached the small lakeside village of Dongo, near Lake Como. The road was narrow, and partisans from the Garibaldi Brigade, led by Urbano Lazzaro, had set up a roadblock there. The Germans in the convoy told the partisans they were simply passing through, but the partisans were suspicious. They began inspecting each truck. One by one, the soldiers and passengers were ordered to get out. Among them were several Italian men in German uniforms, something that immediately raised doubts. Mussolini sat quietly inside one of the trucks, trying not to make eye contact. A partisan noticed the strange silence of one soldier and demanded he step down. When Mussolini climbed out, the men around him froze, even dirty and disguised. His face was unmistakable. The partisans surrounded him instantly. Clara Petacci jumped from another vehicle and ran to his side, refusing to let anyone separate them. The two were taken into custody and brought to a nearby building under guard. Word spread quickly. Within hours, messages were sent to partisan leaders and the National Liberation Committee in Milan. They couldn't believe it. After years of war, Mussolini had finally been caught, alive. Some leaders argued that he should be handed over to the Allies for trial, but others feared that the Allies might treat him as a political prisoner and spare his life. They remembered how he had been rescued by German commandos after being arrested. No one wanted to risk that again. For the partisans, especially those who had lost family to fascist violence, there was only one answer. Mussolini would never leave Italy alive. By the morning of April 28, 1945, Benito Mussolini's final hours had arrived. 2 days had passed since his capture, and there was no hope left. The man who once ruled Italy with fear and pride now sat as a prisoner in a small, quiet corner of the country he once dominated. Mussolini and Clara Petacci were taken from Dongo to the nearby village of Giolino di Mezzegra, a peaceful place near Lake Como, surrounded by hills and farmland. They were held overnight in a farmhouse belonging to the De Maria family, guarded by local partisans who took turns watching them. Mussolini barely spoke, knowing what was coming. Clara, still loyal to him, refused to sleep. She stayed close, holding his hand and whispering to him in the dark. That morning, a car arrived carrying a man known to the partisans as Colonel Valerio. His real name was Walter Aldicio, a communist partisan leader from Rome. He carried an official order from the National Liberation Committee that Mussolini was to be executed immediately. The decision had been made to prevent any chance of his rescue or a political trial that might turn him into a symbol for remaining fascists. The small group moved the prisoners from the farmhouse to a nearby stone wall by Villa Belmonte. Mussolini walked slowly. He had no uniform left, no medals, no speeches, just fear and silence. Clara refused to leave his side. Even when told to step away, she clung to him, saying she would die with him. The partisans took their positions. Valerio raised his weapon. A short burst of gunfire filled the air, echoing through the valley. Mussolini collapsed instantly, followed by Clara. Just like that, it was over. Mussolini was 61 years old. Clara was 33. It was a simple ending for a man who had dreamed of ruling all of Europe. No crowd, no salute, no farewell. Only 2 lifeless bodies lying on a dirt road in a quiet village. But the story didn't end there. What happened next would shock the entire world. After the execution, the partisans placed Mussolini and Clara Petacci's bodies in a truck. Alongside them were several other high-ranking fascists who had been captured and executed the same morning, including Alessandro Pavolini and Achille Starace, 2 of Mussolini's most loyal followers. The truck began the journey south toward Milan, about 50 miles away. When the truck entered Piazzale Loreto, the crowd was already gathering. The same square had been the site of a horrific event less than a year earlier. In August 1944, fascist soldiers executed 15 partisans there and left their bodies lying in the street as a warning to others. Many locals still remembered the smell of death that filled the air that day. Now, history was turning on itself. The partisans unloaded the bodies and dumped them on the ground. People rushed forward, shouting and crying. Decades of anger, hunger, and loss poured out all at once. Some in the crowd threw stones. Others spat, kicked, or struck the corpses. Later, the partisans decided to hang the bodies upside down from a metal girder at a nearby gas station. Mussolini, Clara, and several of his followers were tied by their ankles and left hanging for everyone to see. For many Italians, this was the ultimate symbol of justice. Photographers captured the scene. The images of Mussolini and Clara's hanging bodies spread across the world within days. Newspapers printed them on front pages from New York to London. It was one of the most shocking scenes in post-war Europe. After the shocking public display in Milan, authorities quickly realized they had to act fast. The sight of Mussolini's body hanging in Piazzale Loreto had already drawn worldwide attention, and the new Italian leadership feared that his followers might try to glorify him even after death. To prevent that, they ordered his body to be removed quietly. Late at night, partisans and officials loaded the bodies into a truck and took them away from the city. Mussolini's body, along with Clara Petacci's, was buried secretly in an unmarked grave at Milan's Musocco Cemetery on April 29, 1945. There was no name, no sign, no ceremony. The goal was to erase his presence and stop his tomb from becoming a gathering place for die-hard fascists. For a while it worked. Nobody knew where his body was, and the country moved on to rebuild itself. But peace didn't last long. In April 1946, a group of fascist loyalists managed to steal Mussolini's body from the cemetery. It was an embarrassing incident for the authorities. Italy was still fragile after the war, and the theft created a wave of rumors and tension. The group responsible was led by Domenico Lecchisi, a former fascist soldier. They took the corpse and hid it for months, moving it from place to avoid discovery. The search went on for weeks, and the mystery filled newspapers across Italy. Finally, in August 1946, police located the body hidden in a small Capuchin monastery near Pavia, south of Milan. Monks had secretly kept it safe after being approached by fascist sympathizers who didn't want it desecrated. The discovery was both shocking and embarrassing for the new Italian authorities, who immediately took control of the remains. For the next 11 years, Mussolini's body was kept hidden under government supervision. It was moved several times and stored in various places, including police facilities and church properties, to prevent any political unrest. Only a few officials knew its exact location. Meanwhile, arguments continued between Mussolini's family, the church, and the state about what should be done with his remains. Finally, in 1957, the Italian government decided to allow the body to be reburied in Mussolini's hometown, Predappio, in the Emilia-Romagna region. His body was placed in the family tomb inside the San Cassiano cemetery, where his parents were also buried. Thousands of people attended the reburial, including loyal fascists who had kept his memory alive. Even decades later, Mussolini's tomb remains a controversial site. Every year, small groups of people visit on the anniversary of his death, leaving flowers or making the fascist salute. While most Italians reject his legacy, some still see him as a figure from a time of national pride. This ongoing divide shows how deeply his rule affected Italy, not just politically, but emotionally.